listener production.
Hello, welcome to this week's bonus episode. Sasha Barbagout with you. Today we are bringing you the latest episode from the team at Secrets We Keep, the explosive story of how former spy and now independent MP Andrew Wilkie blew the whistle to expose the lie that led to the Iraq War. In this chat, Wilkie sits down with investigative journo Joey Watson to unpack what it's like to turn whistleblower and challenge power in the lead up to war. So here it is. I hope you enjoy.
Joey Watson here. This is Secrets We Keep Uncovered, where we bring you the inside stories of some of the most important investigations of our time. Today, the Australian spy who unleashed a political scandal when he accused the government of lying in the lead up to war. More than 20 years ago, Andrew Wilkie, now an independent federal member of parliament, was working as an intelligence analyst inside the system as the Australian government was gearing up to join the United States in the looming Iraq War, a war that was facing opposition from all around the world. He realised that the rationale for the US-led war, which was being peddled to the Australian people and its allies, was based on faulty intelligence. He blew up his life and his career to speak out. So on this episode, I get an inside view into the world of Australian intelligence and how it can be abused by those in power to justify the unimaginable. Like many intelligence officers, Andrew's career was forged in the army.
Well, my first career over about 20 years was actually as an army officer. So I left school at 18, went off to the Royal Military College, untrue, where I was in training for 5 years. This was before the Defence Force Academy was established. I was in infantry for 15 years, reached the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. So that's the foundation stone.
Andrew's dip into intelligence first came through a secondment.
My last posting in the Army for 2 years was seconded from the regular Army into the Office of National Assessments.
From 1977 to 2018, the Office of National Assessments, or ONA, was Australia's top intelligence analysis agency, created to give the Prime Minister independent, no-spin judgments about world events by collecting and weighing intelligence from Australia's domestic and overseas spy agencies.
It coordinates all of the other agencies like ASIO and ASIS and so on. It hoovers up all of the intelligence and open source material that it can get its hands on, provides assessments for the Prime Minister to inform the government about matters of international significance. So I suppose you'd call it the senior spy agency. Great place to work.
Andrew was seconded to ONA to give a soldier's perspective.
They felt that warfighters could bring a different perspective to their analysis, whereas they were largely academics, diplomats. Just about everyone seemed to have a PhD, I think. I came in as very much a sort of a practical person with a practical take on things. So I worked there for a couple of years. I then left the Army, so I left that job, went away for a year or so, worked for an American defence contractor, and then I saw my old job being advertised in a civilian role. So I applied for that and went back into ONA as a civilian member of the staff.
Andrew loves this job.
I was part of a fairly small team giving very high-level advice to the government, to the Prime Minister personally. I felt that I was in the thick of the big issues. I had access to the most sensitive material about the big issues. It was a very worthwhile role. It was a valuable role. I felt I was contributing, making a difference, acting very much in the national interest.
Then, in late 2001,
American 11, are you trying to call?
I am in a situation with American 11, a possible hijack.
Jules, listen, on an airplane that's been hijacked. If things will go well, I want you to know I absolutely fuck you.
the world was shaken.
What are those people going to do? All the elevators are blocked down.
On September 11th, 2001, Al-Qaeda carried out the deadliest terror attack in history by hijacking 4 commercial airliners in the United States. 2 planes were plunged into the World Trade Center in New York. Close to 3,000 people died because of the attack. Thousands more were injured. It was a day that left an indelible mark on all those who lived through it.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended.
And it changed the course of history.
Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
The horrid terrorist attacks, that was the prompt for the US first to declare a war on terror. It rocked not only the US to the core, it rocked all of us, and in particular, countries like Australia, the United Kingdom. The Prime Minister at the time was John Howard, and he was actually in Washington on the day of the 9/11 attacks. One aircraft, of course, flew into the Pentagon in Washington, and he literally looked out the window of his hotel room to see smoke rising from the Pentagon. Our Prime Minister, probably more than most Australians, was personally involved in what happened that day and was greatly affected by it. So as a result of that, the US declared that it was going to attack and invade Afghanistan.
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps in Afghanistan.
I think most people, in fact, including myself, saw the response in Afghanistan against the regime and against al-Qaeda there. It was largely, I think, broadly seen as a warranted response.
It was an attack the world was anticipating. Unleashing its wrath, America, with the help from Britain, has struck at Taliban targets and terrorist training camps across Afghanistan.
The call to arms from the US Commander-in-Chief in the treaty room at the White House.
The battle is now joined on many fronts.
The commitments quickly came from Australia and the UK to join in the invasion of Afghanistan, to remove the Taliban and to root out and destroy the al-Qaeda terrorist network.
We are joined in this operation by our staunch friend, Great Britain. Other close friends, including Canada, Australia, Germany, and France, have pledged forces as the operation unfolds. We will not waver. We will not tire. We will not falter. And we will not fail.
They were dramatic days. That ran its course very quickly. It was a remarkable military operation by the US and its allies to achieve the mission. But then it morphed to this war on terror.
4 months after the 9/11 attacks, in his 2002 State of the Union address, President George W. Bush labelled Iraq, Iran, and North Korea as regimes that he said threatened global security.
States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world by seeking weapons of mass destruction. These regimes pose a grave and growing danger.
What began as a targeted invasion of Afghanistan after 9/11 quickly expanded into something far broader.
Iraq continues to flaunt its hostility toward America and to support terror.
The campaign to dismantle al-Qaeda was reframed into the global war on terror.
This is a regime that agreed to international inspections, then kicked out the inspectors.
With it, the narrative about targeting al-Qaeda began to shift.
This is a regime that has something to hide from the civilized world.
It slowly morphed into something much different. For all sorts of reasons, the Americans were painting a picture or telling a story that Iraq was just as complicit as Afghanistan in the terrorist threat to the United States, which it wasn't. Somehow Iraq was being rolled into the story about the war on terror and as the natural follow-on to the invasion of Afghanistan. It was well understood that the leader of Iraq at the time, Saddam Hussein, he didn't have any relationship with al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. And it wasn't a religious-based regime. Their military capabilities were very limited after more than a decade of UN sanctions against Iraq. But for a number of reasons, America wanted to extend the war and ultimately in 2003 to invade and conquer Iraq. And this is where I come into the story as someone who was increasingly concerned about what was happening. As an ex-Army Lieutenant Colonel, I was put on notice that I needed to get my head around the evolving situation with Iraq, because I'd be expected to work in the National Intelligence Watch Office at ONA once the war started. In late 2002, I was asked to write an intelligence assessment on the potential humanitarian implications of a war in Iraq. And I found that a very, very sobering exercise to think about all of the things that could go wrong from a humanitarian point of view. I mean, I had access to all sorts of information. So that was another layer, another privileged layer I had, having to follow and keep an eye on and understand the build-up to war.
From Andrew's perspective, the intention for war didn't match the intelligence that he was seeing in his job.
I'm watching this war on terror morph into something that wasn't warranted. And I'm seeing these explanations for invading Iraq evolve, and they became just quite fantastic and implausible. The narrative was that the Iraqi regime was cooperating with al-Qaeda, that the Iraqis had a massive arsenal of weapons of mass destruction, in particular chemical weapons, and a very advanced nuclear program to build nuclear weapons, and that it was just a matter of time, and it was quite imminent, but it was a matter of time before the Iraqis would give these weapons of mass destruction to the terrorists, and the terrorists would be using them. And this was the great lie. Put yourself in my shoes. I'm an ex-army officer. I'm studying the situation in countries like Iraq. I'm watching with great care the evolving case for war. I'm writing assessments on what could go wrong from a humanitarian point of view. And against all of that, I'm increasingly coming to understand that the government was lying about the reasons for going to war. And there were any number of times where the Prime Minister, John Howard, or his Defence Minister or his Foreign Minister would talk about, as a fact, that Iraq had this massive arsenal of weapons of mass destruction, that it was cooperating with the architect of 9/11. And I'm seeing all these facts against this concocted, dishonest argument by the Australian government for joining with the United States and going to war.
Prime Minister John Howard was facing pushback over the idea of joining the Iraq War, with many Australians and world leaders questioning the case for military action. He was steadfast, though.
The intelligence assessments that came to me were strong and firm. We are determined to join other countries to deprive Iraq of its weapons of mass destruction.
So it became increasingly difficult for me personally to reconcile the facts on the ground and the uncertainty on the ground and what the government was saying. The government was lying to the Australian people about why we should support the US and join in the invasion of Iraq in 2003 and ultimately become one of the occupying powers. And it reached a point where by my standards, by my values, it was unsupportable. And not only unsupportable that I couldn't keep supporting the government, but I felt ultimately I had a moral duty to alert people to this dishonesty.
Was there a particular moment where you remember starting to get that uneasy feeling that the politics was getting ahead of the intelligence insofar as the case for war was concerned?
I can recall, I suppose, several memorable points in time, but I think the more accurate answer to your question is it just slowly built up. The pressure on the dam wall the dam was filling up and the pressure on the wall was just increasing, and at some point my thinking crossed the line. I mean, obviously writing that intelligence assessment on the potential humanitarian implications of a war, that was a pivotal moment for me. It really makes you stop and think that this isn't some great adventure like a Hollywood movie or something as straightforward as Afghanistan in 2001 ended up being. This was something of enormous humanitarian significance that could only possibly be contemplated for the most pressing of reasons. I remember not long before the invasion, the US Secretary of State, Colin Powell, he gave a presentation to the United Nations. He basically made the case to the United Nations about Iraq's WMD program.
Every statement I make today is backed up by sources, solid sources. These are not assertions. What we're giving you are facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence. Indeed, the facts and Iraq's behavior show that Saddam Hussein and his regime are concealing their efforts to produce more weapons of mass destruction. Saddam Hussein has chemical weapons. Saddam Hussein has used such weapons. And Saddam Hussein has no compunction about using them again against his neighbors and against his own people.
And he had on a stand big enlarged photographs showing some of the evidence And I can remember being at O&A with colleagues and watching this telecast on the screen. It was broadcast on the telly. And we're looking at each other thinking, that's just not right. I can still remember clearly he had this great big enlarged photo, black and white, on an easel or something, and he was describing it as a WMD decontamination vehicle next to an ammunition bunker. This is taken from a satellite. And it was a bit grainy because they didn't use the highest resolution stuff publicly. I remember looking at this photo and us commenting among ourselves, so that's not a WMD decontamination vehicle, it's a fire truck. And I'm thinking back to my army days and thinking that's completely unremarkable to have a fire truck near an ammunition storage facility in case there's a fire. But there's Colin Powell, former US Army general, very highly regarded, respected man, very authoritative. He must have known it wasn't a decontamination vehicle, it was a fire truck. We also had diplomats, and we had an O&A liaison officer in Washington prowling the corridors, chatting to people, sending back classified emails or cables, we'd call them diplomatic cables, talking about the thinking and what was going on and why people were inflating the threat from Iraq and what really were their intentions, what were they thinking, what were they planning to do. I can remember one looking over the shoulder of a colleague at a classified email that had come in from Washington from the O&A liaison officer, where the LO was very critical of the thinking in Washington. Over time, my concerns accumulated, and at some point I decided I had to do something about it.
Did you share your concerns with your colleagues?
Yeah, look, I wasn't the only person with concerns. I can't remember the size of O&A at the time. I'll guess it might have been 50 or something, 40, 50. And these were highly professional, duty-bound people, highly intelligent, but some of them were developing the same concerns as me. Small numbers of people would just make the odd comment. You knew there was a bit of unease in some quarters.
But there was one colleague in particular that was a kind of confidant, right?
My work colleague, Kate Bird, I shared with Kate carefully. I was trying to protect other people, but I shared some of my concerns with Kate.
Where were you when you decided that you were going to blow the whistle?
I can remember exactly. I was in Colombo, the capital of Sri Lanka, in February. The invasion was in March. Travelling on government business, I had to go to several countries. I remember being in a hotel room watching on the international news service footage of the huge protests around the world.
Hundreds of thousands of people poured into Sydney's central business district for the largest anti-war protest in Australia's history.
Mr. Bush, Mr. Howard, with what conscience will you sleep at night, knowing that you will have the blood on your hand of innocent women, children and soldiers from an unjustified war?
I don't like the idea of this particular war.
I'm strongly opposed to it and I think this is the only thing we can do because the government obviously doesn't want to hear what we're saying.
Millions of people protesting around the world. That had some influence on me. I didn't think that those millions of people knew more than I knew, but you can't be unaffected by the size of the protests in all of the major cities around the world the month before the invasion, including in Australia.
As Andrew watched the anti-war protests, he knew that he could no longer ignore his inner voice.
To take a country to war on a lie, I can't think of behaviour more egregious than that. And all this is weighing on me, and I know that I'll soon be heading back to Australia, and I can remember it was in Colombo that I finally said, this is what I'm going to do. It wouldn't have been effective for me just to have spoken up internally and got sacked. Something bigger had to be done. And then the thinking was, how am I going to do it? Do I resign? Do I not resign? Do I go to the media? Do I not go to the media? If I go to the media, which is the best journalist to approach? How would I approach them secretly so that my intentions weren't revealed in advance, which would have had me shut down?
Did you tell Kate?
Yes.
How did that conversation go?
Kate was a sounding board. She shared all of my concerns. We discussed whether we both should resign, although it was decided that Kate wasn't as close to the issue and the information as I was. Ultimately, it was something for me to do alone. But Kate was aware of my intentions.
So tell me, Andrew, about taking this to the media? What's the first step?
So I decided that Laurie Oakes was the best person to approach.
Laurie Oakes is a highly respected Australian political journalist and author who spent more than 50 years reporting from the Canberra Press Gallery before he retired in 2017.
He was, in the day, probably Australia's highest profile journalist when it came to big political stories and getting amazing leaks and stuff. And I knew he lived not far from me in Canberra because I'd seen him while walking our dogs. And I was pretty sure I knew which house he lived in. So I must have resigned on a Tuesday. On the Friday the week prior, I slipped my O&A business card in his letterbox. And I just simply wrote something like, I can't remember, but something like, "Oh, can you give me a call?" He told me afterwards, a long time afterwards, that it was a miracle he found the card because he had all these real mail directed to a PO box. And his letterbox just tended to fill up with junk mail and he'd throw it out periodically. But as luck would have it, on the Friday, he'd cleared his letterbox. And, of course, seeing an official government business card with the Office of National Assessments on it, with "please give me a call" and a phone number, he was smart enough to think, I better get that bloke a call.
On Friday evening, Andrew was hosting a dinner party at his house with guests that included some work colleagues from the Office of National Assessments.
The phone rings and there's this mysterious number on my phone. And I thought, it might be Laurie, I better ring it. I went out on the little veranda of my unit in Canberra. The conversation it must have only been half a dozen sentences. It was basically, "Can we catch up tomorrow?" And I had to go back in and sit down with a group of my colleagues as though nothing had happened. He came round to my apartment the next day on the Saturday. I gave him the gist of it. He wanted me to think about it. He wanted to think about it. He said, "Can we talk on the Sunday?" We met again on the Sunday. And to his enormous credit, he explained to me the enormity of blowing the whistle on this and calling the Prime Minister a liar, and offered me the opportunity to walk away and we would just pretend the conversation never happened. And he reminded me that me giving him the information put me at risk of up to 2 years jail under the Crimes Act. So that was the environment in which we were operating. But I said, no, we'll get on with it. He was going to make it a front page story for the Bulletin magazine, which existed at the time, and get it as a breaking news on Channel 9 News. And then there was a period of all very, very hush and care, because if O&A or anyone had become aware of what I was up to, no doubt they would have shut me down straight away in one way or another.
Before Andrew formally resigned, he recorded his TV interview with Laurie Oakes in secret. A photographer travelled to Canberra to take his photos for the print story on the sly. Everything had to be kept under wraps. If the government were to find out about the story, they'd have the power to bury it. So tell me about the preparations you made, basically to leave O&A and any intelligence or really national security job forever.
Over several days in the week beforehand, I destroyed all of the documents that would normally be destroyed when not used anymore down the shredder. Got my safe in good order so whoever would open it afterwards wouldn't be able to find whatever they needed to put where it should be. Got all my passports in one little spot there and got everything on my desk in good order, really out of consideration to O&A that whoever had to clean up wouldn't have too much of a paperwork mess. And I gave a set of my keys to my apartment to Kate, my colleague, and said, just in case I'm detained, here's a set of keys to my apartment to however might be needed. So there was a sense of, there was an understanding that it was something that could have seen me locked up.
Mm.
I told my ex-wife, who at that stage was a senior army officer, I gave her a heads up of not exactly what I was going to do, but I just warned her that there might be a bit of a kerfuffle, in the next few days. I rang my father a couple of days in advance. I didn't tell him what, I just told him that next week I could be mixed up in quite a controversy. I was actually very worried about my father because by that stage my father must have been in his 80s, I think. Might have mangled the maths a bit there. And he was in poor health. He was a World War II tail gunner on Lancaster bombers. As he got older, he had heart problems. Talking very frankly, I worried that him witnessing me blowing the whistle on the Iraq War, it could have killed him. So I gave him a bit of a heads up.
Mm.
It's an interesting thing about whistleblowing, Joey, that, there's all these things people might think about, but that was something I had to think about. Would the shock be too much for my father? Not just physically for his heart, but just the emotional shock. I mean, my parents had both served in the services, both in the Air Force. The brother had served in the regular army. My family were largely conservative and big fans of John Howard. And there's a very personal side to this, to whistleblowing. And every whistleblower's got a different story to tell in that regard.
On Tuesday, March 11, 2003, Andrew walked into the ONA's top boss's office.
Told the Director General, I'm resigning. I've gone to the media about the PM and others lying about the war.
At this moment, Andrew Wilkie became the only serving intelligence official in the US, UK or Australia to resign before the invasion.
The TV crew was downstairs, but I found I was just too upset and I rang Laurie and said, I can't do it. Just let me go home.
Less than a week after Andrew first approached the journalist Laurie Oakes, the story would break on Channel 9 News. The scandal sparked a tsunami of headlines all over the country.
Good evening. John Howard has denied claims by a former intelligence analyst that the government embellished material about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. Andrew Wilkie says the government deliberately skewed the truth about Iraq's weapons capabilities.
So I went home thinking, okay, there might be some requests for media interviews and hopefully I won't be locked up and in a couple of days' time I can get on with my life. But the news went to air early, half an hour earlier in one of the states, and I don't know how people got a hold of my phone number, but the phone just started ringing. That night I had literally hundreds of voicemails. At a bit after 7, the host for the ABC 7:30 report somehow got a hold of me. I don't know how everyone got a hold of my number. Kerry O'Brien, he was the host. He rang me at about 7:10 and introduced himself and asked me to go on the 7:30 report that night. And I said, oh, no way. I mean, I was at home, I was upset, I was in tears, I hadn't prepared any speaking notes, I'd never done media, didn't know what I was going to say. But anyway, Kerry, in a matter of minutes, somehow it persuaded me. He said, we'll have a car there in 5 or 10 minutes. I was in Kingston, which is literally a few minutes' drive from Parliament House. Went downstairs, ABC had a car. They got me up into the press gallery in New Parliament House and in the studio, not much after 7:30, and I went to air for what was actually probably the worst media interview I've done in now 23 years. It was a bit of a train wreck, but I got through it okay. Pretty scary.
The fallout from Andrew's revelations was swift and deeply personal. He was cast as a traitor, frozen out of the intelligence community, and left to carry the consequences alone. Whistleblowing didn't just end his career in intelligence, it reshaped his life. It took a toll on his finances, his marriage, and his faith in the institutions he'd once served.
I did have several death threats over a couple of years. I was never confronted violently, directly.
Commentators discredited Andrew Wilkie publicly. This is commentator Andrew Bolt, writing in the Herald Sun.
I knew the media would instantly promote Andrew Wilkie and award him a Guru Medal when he quit the Office of National Assessment in protest against any war with Iraq. Wilkie was at the ONA's 4th level of seniority and in a branch that didn't deal with Iraq. The ONA says he did not have access to various categories of intelligence on Iraq.
But many in the wider community supported him. In letters published in newspapers at the time, there was plenty of expressions of support and admiration.
Andrew Wilkie, you are a real hero, being prepared to risk your job and personal credibility in the pursuit of peace.
Andrew Wilkie accurately reflects what the majority of Australians think on Iraq. Watch out for a government vilification program.
A man of morals, of whom there are too few in our present federal government.
Thank you for your honest opinion and for confirming the suspicions of many of us that war is not necessary now.
Only a week after Andrew's shock resignation, despite the unquestionable worldwide public opposition to the war, the invasion of Iraq goes ahead.
The waiting is over. The war on Saddam has begun.
We're all being told to evacuate this hotel immediately. We'll talk to you later.
Developments are happening very, very swiftly.
These are opening stages of what will be a broad and concerted campaign.
Do you remember where you were when the invasion happened?
Holed up in my apartment in Kingston in Canberra, watching a lot of it unfold on the telly like everyone else. I never thought I was going to stop a war. I held out some small hope that Australia might pull back and not join in the war. But if nothing else, the public needed to know the truth.
The Iraq War dragged on from 2003 into the completion of the full US military withdrawal in December 2011. The extent of the death toll from the conflict is unknown, as figures are contested. Some estimates say there were between 160,000 and 210,000 deaths. Others suggest the figure is closer to 500,000. As early as 2004, only a year after the invasion, various reports showed Saddam Hussein had no stockpiles of weapons of mass destruction.
As it turned out, after resigning and being in all that controversy, my claims had been found to be pretty accurate, pretty close to accurate. I think even I overestimated the WMD dimension. I thought Saddam Hussein might have had a bit of something. Even I was shocked he had nothing. I formed the view that the Iraq War for Australia wasn't the problem in itself. It was a symptom of something worse. There was never a proper inquiry into it all. There are two inquiries looking at the intelligence aspects of it, but there was never an inquiry into why did the government behave the way it did? Should anyone be held to account? There was an inquiry in the UK which actually did a pretty good job and looked at the British government's involvement in Iraq. And in recent years, the then Prime Minister, Tony Blair, he actually expressed some regret for the decisions around the UK joining in the invasion in 2003. No such regret was ever expressed by George W. Bush or John Howard. So because we never really dissected it and looked at ways to prevent a repeat of it, then we do risk a repeat of it in the future.
John Howard, both then and in the years since, has denied deliberately deceiving Australians about the Iraq invasion. After walking away from intelligence, Andrew Wilkie remained in public life, taking his fight into politics. These days, as an independent member of Parliament, he's been appointed as a member of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, and regularly uses his parliamentary privilege to leak information from other whistleblowers.
I certainly never had a grand, cunning plan. I never had this grand plan that I'm going to say the government lied over the war, I'm going to become a big public figure, and that's going to be my ticket to a political career. I very much lived in the moment, but the more you become involved in the political process, the more you're campaigning, the more you start to learn all about other areas of public policy. And somewhere along the line, national and security policy became just one of many aspects of my work. To this day, I continue to push, along with many other people, for war powers reform. Another aspect of this, which is actually quite alarming, is that governments have become more and more ruthless in their response to whistleblowers. If I did today what I did in 2003, I don't doubt I would go to jail for a long time. What I did was just a bit ahead of the curve. And because I so quickly got a public profile and I spoke for so many people, the government, I don't know if they ever thought about detaining me, but they soon, I think, lost the option to have me detained because I was giving voice to a lot of people. And I was quickly found to be, pretty right. I would have been a political prisoner. So I actually had a dream run. Even though there was a lot of downsides, I lost a great job, I lost a lot of money, I lost a marriage, I lost a lot of friends. There was a lot of challenges in there. But nothing like being a whistleblower these days. These days, governments respond forcibly with whistleblowers, partly to get even and to punish them, but partly to send a message to other potential whistleblowers: don't cause problems. So unsurprisingly, I continue to push for greater protections for whistleblowers. It's a tough country to blow the whistle. In Australia, you go to jail. I think we should celebrate whistleblowers. I think they're an essential part of a healthy democracy. So that was a long-winded way of saying I'm very grateful and I got a happy ending, but most people don't end up like me.
And there's also a love story in all of this with your colleague Kate, who you confided in.
Kate at the time was very happy in a relationship with someone else. But somewhere along the line we became a pair, and Kate's the mother of my 18-year-old daughter, Olive, and my 17-year-old daughter, Rose. Although eventually that marriage fell over, but we're still good mates.
That's so nice to hear. Andrew Wilkie, thank you.
Thanks, Joey.
That's all for this week. If you want more of Andrew Wilkie's story, check out his book, Axis of Deceit. This episode of Uncovered was hosted by me, Joey Watson. Supervising producer is Claudiana Blanco. Fact check by Holly Mitchell. And sound design by Matt Nikolic. If you have any tips for us, you can email secretswekeep@sca.com.au. And if you'd like to support our journalism, please don't forget to rate us and leave a comment on the Listener app, Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
That was Joey Watson's interview with Andrew Wilkie there. And a reminder, the team at Secrets We Keep is putting out new eps every week. Just search Secrets We Keep wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for listening today. Just one more hook before you go. If you haven't yet, be sure to go back in the feed to hear yesterday's Weekend Briefing ep with Eli Matangi. It was a really great chat. I really enjoyed learning so much about him. All right, that's it. See you tomorrow morning for the headlines.